cement myself. It's a lot easier and lot less painful with those guys doing it.
Okay, I take back what I said. Let's get onto the
Thank you.
roof then. I've got pressed metal tiles on my roof and it had small stones on them. The stones have come off, but the tiles aren't rusty. Can I get the tiles replaced or fixed up?
I take it that's dichromatic roofing. Look, if the roof is in great shape, by all means. If there's a company, if it's all right that I mention that I know that are very good at doing this because I've used them a number of times. They're called the Ko-Fi guys, and I'm pretty sure they're countrywide. They come in and they will respray the stones back onto those dichromatic tiles. And if there are a few rusty ones, they will replace them. And the thing with those dichromatic tiles, quite often, because the profile of them, they're very easily to dent, so they can pop the dents back out, respray them with the stones, and paint them whatever colour you like as well. So it's a pretty simple job, yeah.
I have an old villa with double-hung sash windows and I can't open them as some of the old rope is broken. Can I repair them? Ask someone.
Yeah, you can. So the way that you go about replacing the rope on double-hung sash windows, if it's the original glass, like I said before, on those older villas and that was only like 2, maybe 3 millimetres thick. So they're incredibly thin and light. And if the glass has been replaced, the glass is heavier because it's thicker. Now, with the weights that were made for those glass, quite often the window doesn't fall correctly. The balance isn't right because the glass is heavier. So you can actually buy, I'll get around to answering that question in a sec, but you can actually get around to buying lead weights that go, little ones that are about 20 millimetres high that will go on top of your existing cast iron ones. So when you replace the rope, you've got to, before you close it all up, you want to test it all out, make sure you've got the balance right. So the way you go about it is there's a little bit of a beading that holds the double glazing those in, and it's about a 30 mil wide. It's got a little bull nose on it. From the inside, you pull that off, and it goes all 4 sides. You pull that off, and your inside window should be able to just flop out. Now, if it's just your inside ones where you need your rope replacing, that's all nice and easy. You'll have a look at on your left or right hand side, on both sides of the sides of the jamb of the window, there's a little access panel, and that's where you gain access to your lead weights. Whether they've fallen off or if the rope's broken and they're sitting down there, you'll see a little panel that's about 75 mil, say 3 inches wide, and it's probably about 200-300 millimetres long. You open that up. Usually there's one screw in it, a little flat screw. Open that up, and you'll find your weight down the bottom. You put your new rope through the pulley at the top, drop it down, attach it to your sash weight, put a knot on the end of it, let that slip into your sash weight, and then you attach it to the side of your window. Now, this is the bit where you've got to sort of do a little bit of trickery, not nail the whole thing off, and you use like a 40 mil galvanised flathead. So you nail that to the side of your sash window. There's a rebate in there to allow for the rope to go in, and there's a hole drilled in the side. So you tie a knot, the knot goes in the hole, and then you nail that in. And then so once you've got your balance right, then you nail it off. So if it's all sitting there nice and neat, and the window goes up and down quite nice and freely, you know that you've probably still got the existing glass. If the window just drops down very quickly and it's not opening up nice and easily, you'll probably have to buy some little lead weight extensions from like a glazing shop and add those on to get the counterweight right.
You got a nice weekend planned, Stan?
Well, I've actually just had a delivery of some beautiful stone slabs, like some lava stone that's been cut to about 40 mil thick. So I'm planning on laying those as a pathway in the backyard this weekend, and praying for the swell to pop up, but I don't see that happening, I don't think.
Well, mate, if you need any advice while you're doing the job, just give me a call. I'm happy to talk you through it.
Oh, no, good one, mate. I'm glad you've always got my back there. Thanks, Jesse.
Stan Scott, the builder. Nice to chat to you. Thanks very much. And you'll be back in a couple of weeks if you've got a question about DIY at your own house. We got through a few of those today. We got up to the person who wanted to know if they could remove an internal wall in their house. I suspected that was going to be a long answer, so we'll save that one for next week. It's 28 to 4. RNZ National, Friday afternoon, and time for Critter of the Week with Doc. Employee Nicola Tuki. It's quite hard to keep up with what your job is actually there as you rapidly ascend through the ranks, Nicola. So I'll just say Nick from Doc, hi.
Hi. That's good. I always like an afternoon promotion on RNZ.
Nick has her own budgets to worry about at Doc as one of the big head honchos there. But we have a little budget of our own for you and me to work out, Nick, and that's what to do with $6,000, over $6,000 we've raised with Critter of the Week T-shirts.
Woohoo! That is very exciting.
Yeah, so cool, so cool. And we've already heard from loads of people with suggestions of what to do with the money, but I've given them sort of a deadline of 5 p.m. today, so a last chance really for people to get in touch and put their hand up for it. Anything you'd like to say about the criteria?
I think what I really want to do is just acknowledge the enormous amount of, like, I love this. I love that we get to divvy out a little bit of money to people doing special things.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Good afternoon. The new cabinet was sworn in by the Governor-General this morning and met for the first time this afternoon. I can now confirm then that the formal commission opening of Parliament will occur on Wednesday, 25 November, where MPs will be sworn in and a Speaker elected. The official state opening will be the next day, Thursday, 26 November, where the speech from the throne is delivered and the address and reply debate will begin. House sitting for normal business will start the following week, Tuesday, 1 December, and will rise for the year on Wednesday, 9 December. Business will include the address and reply debate, maiden speeches, and legislation we need to progress prior to Christmas. Yesterday at my Business New Zealand speech, I set out the government's priorities through to the end of the year. Broadly, these are our economic recovery and keeping New Zealanders safe from COVID-19. We want to give business certainty prior to the summer break, which is why we will be progressing changes to the small business loan scheme to provide an interest-free line of support to our small businesses to assist them weather the economic impact from COVID. Cabinet will meet again on Monday, and each Monday from now until the following week of the House rising. So the House will rise, Cabinet will meet for an additional meeting thereafter. We have a busy agenda through to the end of the year, more of which I will set out next week. I'd also like to comment briefly on some of the final election results that we've seen come through this afternoon. It is fantastic to see Dr. Emily Henderson take out Whangarei and join our 65-strong caucus. I also want to congratulate Willow Jean Prime, who has won Northland, and Priyanka Radhikrishna, who has taken out Mangakiki. It is an extraordinarily big day for Priyanka in particular, who this morning joined the executive and this afternoon has won her seat. And I'm enormously proud as well of our candidates in the North. As I said on election night and many times since, we will be the government for all New Zealanders, not least because we must make sure we represent all those who elected us, be they in city seats, rural seats, general seats or Māori seats. Today I reminded Cabinet that the honour of serving comes with enormous responsibility. We take nothing for granted in leading the team of 5 million over the next 3 years. There are significant challenges for us to overcome together, but I am confident we have the team to do it, and it is great to be officially able to now crack on with it. I'm happy to take questions.
Minister, how did it feel to get 50% of the popular vote?
I have to say, receiving that news this afternoon, I was incredibly humbled by that mandate. That is extraordinary to have that level of support from New Zealanders, and with that comes significant responsibility. It's our job now to get on with the plan and the work that they elected us to get on with.
This referendum tightened significantly. 48% of the country wanted you to legalise cannabis. Does that put it on your agenda to do something about at least decriminalising?
Yeah, look, when it comes to a referendum, a majority is a majority. And so it hasn't tipped the balance in terms of what we as a government will do. We gave our commitment to New Zealanders. If it won the majority, we would progress legislation. If it didn't, we wouldn't.
Do you regret staying silent?
Look, you're asking me, do I regret allowing people to make their own decision on this incredibly important issue? No. In my view, people did need to make their own personal choice on this in the same way that I did.
Can you understand how people may be frustrated, though, because your support, your backing could have tipped it over?
And it may not have as well. You know, ultimately, New Zealanders have made up their own minds. They've expressed their own personal opinion. And that ultimately was something that I set out right from the very beginning. That was my intent for New Zealand to decide, and they have.
You now have 2 MPs in Parliament with the special votes counted. Will you look or consider doing any kind of deal or having any kind of talks with them?
No. Look, any agreements that we would look to undertake, cooperation or otherwise, have already been formed. We're now focused with getting on with the business of government. There will be areas and issues where we will look to work across the aisle, be it with the opposition or other parties, in those specific subject areas. Look, that wouldn't be limited to any one party. If it's important enough to New Zealand, we will look to talk to other political parties.
How would you sum up the mood of the first Cabinet meeting today, especially given it was all Labour MPs around the table?
Now look, in a way, you know, there's some things that never change with a Cabinet, and the magnitude, the gravity of the responsibility, that remains the same. And I sense that amongst all of those members of Parliament. They understand that they have an enormous responsibility, that it is a privileged position, but that we are there to govern through one of the biggest crises that New Zealand has faced. And we don't take that job lightly.
How does casting aside the Māori Party fit with your promise to be a government for all New Zealanders?
Well, of course, being a government for all New Zealand means working through on as much as we can, you know, a consensus basis with others, but I don't think New Zealand expects us, with the mandate that we have, to build formal alliances with a multitude of parties. Our job is to work with what we've been given, to cooperate where it makes sense to build consensus where it's important, but ultimately to get on with the job.
Do you think that party has something to offer you in terms of...
And look, I've said, where there are issues where we believe it's important to work with others in Parliament, we will do that. And there may be that may be the case as there was in the last Parliament. We did that on climate change issues. We did that on child poverty issues. It will be case by case.
So you're sitting for just 2 substantive parliamentary weeks this year. Does that show your legislative agenda is a bit light on?
No, in fact, it's not 2. It crosses over into 3. So we begin with the formal part of the ceremonial side. We then crack into normal business from there. In fact, no, not at all. You will see that in that time we will progress quite a bit of business. And as you can see, it's not just Parliament that allows us to continue with business, Cabinet does as well, and we'll be continuing on with Cabinet meetings as well beyond the House rising.
Kieran Brownlee is...
governing for all New Zealanders, you do have 48.4% of New Zealanders who did vote for legalising cannabis. What do you offer that?
And the majority who didn't, and so we have to be mindful of that too.
But all of those New Zealanders, including the 48.4% who did.
Yes. So you're suggesting that we should now ignore the outcome of the referendum?
But there is an appetite amongst an enormous section of the population for something, and
Yeah.
obviously the referendum did fail, but...
Yeah, and look, I've spoken to a little bit on this before. I think one of the issues that really came through in some of the debate was an anxiousness around, you know, a purely justice-based approach that even keeping, as we will do now in New Zealand, the possession of cannabis as an offence, even then the suggestion has been from many that actually should we take more of a health-based approach there. Now, we have made already changes to the Misuse of Drugs the Act that give direction to the police that unless it's in the public interest to do so, the preference is there that people in possession be referred into health services. That's only just happened. I think our job now is to drill into how that is working in practice, that it's meeting Parliament's expectation and public expectation.
If it isn't meeting that expectation, would you go further?
I think then it would be a matter of, working through with the police. Why is it that we're seeing a difference in what we intended? Because it is very explicit. A health-based approach unless there is a public interest otherwise, and perhaps that public interest is what will need to be well understood. The final thing I'd say is medicinal cannabis is another area where I have heard concern over whether or not, despite that law changing, whether access has improved, and I think that's something that as a parliament we need to be careful of and look into, and I intend to.
What is your expectation of how that law change will be applied? Only about 1 in 10 of those people that police encounter with drug possession as the most serious charge are being referred to health services.
Yeah, so we saw recent data, keeping in mind it is only a recent change, has suggested roughly 500 individuals have been referred. And my assumption, and certainly it's been shared with me, but the most likely outcome we're seeing is that when there are other offences, that a possession offence is being added. So if there's a range of offences, it may be for firearms or for burglary or so on, that possession is then being added in that mix. That's the kind of data I want to drill into. Is it that when it's singularly a possession charge there, that's when we're seeing the referral to health? When it's not, we're not. Let's understand what's happening there and why those decisions are being made by police.
That 1 in 10 ratio, though, is for encounters with people where drug possession is the most serious charge they face.
And again, the intention of Parliament in passing that change was for a health-based approach. And so, as I say, it's only very recent, but I have flagged, and as did Andrew Little before the portfolio change, that it's our intent to look, as any good government should do, at whether or not the intent of that change is being reflected in practice. That's why we've said we do wish to look into that. Yes.
In the United States, although votes were still being counted, the president has asked or demanded of officials to stop counting votes and suggested that votes for his opponent are illegal votes. Is that concerning to you?
Oh, look, I was asked about this yesterday, and of course, very mindful. It is, no one in New Zealand would expect any other leader in any other country to really be seen to be interfering or commentating on anyone else's electoral process or democracy. But what I did say, and what I absolutely stand by, is, of course, as a country, as a people, we have faith in the American institutions. We have faith in their democracy. And of course, their democracy is still underway. They are still counting votes. Here in New Zealand, of course, it's 3 weeks later and we've only just had our final count. So we're well used to it taking a bit of time to work through those final outcomes.
Jerry Brownlee isn't seeking to stay on as deputy leader of the National Party. Who do you think you might see up against Grant Robertson?
I'm not going to get into that speculation. That's obviously news that I only just heard earlier this afternoon. But that is ultimately a matter for the National Party. Decisions around their leadership, changes in their leadership, changes in their caucus, all matters for them. Trevor.
You do have faith in the American democracy. Just following on from Mark's question, isn't it also fair then, as a leader, to kind of send Donald Trump a message, to send a message to the United States that yes, the president is subverting that democracy?
No, I think probably New Zealanders wouldn't necessarily take too kindly for other leaders commentating on our electoral processes, outcomes, and so I won't do the same on this occasion. However, as I've already said, as New Zealanders, I think we have faith in their democratic institutions, and those institutions, of course, require votes to be counted, which is still underway in the United States.
So just on that, if Biden does win the presidency, do you see advantages for New Zealand maybe in the US coming back into the Trans-Pacific Partnership or, getting a trade deal going?
Look, certainly in previous elections we saw positioning on one side of the CPTPP debate by those candidates at that time. So I wouldn't want to make any assumptions there. We build, of course, in every case, a relationship regardless of who the final candidate is that takes the office of president. It is fair to say that obviously when we've had Donald Trump in the role, we've worked very hard on that relationship. We've had bilaterals that have made a difference. If it were to be Vice President Biden, of course there's already an existing knowledge and appreciation, understanding of New Zealand through previous visits as well. So regardless, we will work hard on that relationship, and I'm certain either way it will be a positive one.
So what do you make of the USA withdrawing from the Paris Agreement?
Well, that's been long signalled. And of course, as signatories, you would expect that we would hold a strong belief that the most important thing would be widespread membership and engagement with that agreement. So it would be disappointing for anyone to leave because it is reliant on participation globally.
In your speech yesterday, why did you not acknowledge that house price growth that is now in the double digits annually is part of Labor's economic recovery plan?
Actually, in the line of questions, I acknowledged, that of course, actually it was earlier that morning in a line of questions, I acknowledged that housing, as we did in the campaign, continues to be a considerable issue for New Zealand, as it is for a number of nations presently, that we do need to make sure we're continuing to do all we can to overcome the affordability issues that many New Zealanders face, first-home buyers particularly, as they try and overcome the requirement to meet those deposits that are growing increasingly in size that are required to get into the market. So whilst we saw some signs from CoreLogic around an increasing number of first-home buyers in the market, we're not satisfied. We know there's more to do there.
The Reserve Bank has taken off those LVR restrictions. Would you like to see them put back on?
Well, look, we are looking at the levers that we have, and the levers that we have increasingly been some of those products, and one of the products, like for instance those loans, welcome home loans and so on, that have over time changed criteria to enable more New Zealanders to access them. What I'm very mindful of is increasingly we're seeing a market where those who are able to purchase and those who are not are determined by whether or not they have parents who can support them. No one in New Zealand wants to see a housing market where home ownership is determined by the prior generation being wealthy enough to support the next generation. And yet that is the reality. I'm looking for ways to overcome that.
On the managed isolation voucher system, there's people who book flights months before that voucher system was introduced and have since missed out on vouchers. Do you think people had already booked flights to return home after November 3rd, before November 3rd, should have automatically got those vouchers?
So we were running the voucher system prior to it becoming compulsory on that date. So that was happening prior. Warning was put out in advance that it was compulsory from the 3rd, but that we were also running it prior to that date as well. So without getting into some of the detail around how it was operationalised for someone who had pre-purchased a flight, I would expect, of course, that they would be forewarned around those requirements. Something that's being raised with me is if they were booking indirectly, so they weren't directly booking with an airline, that has proven problematic if they were using third parties to book, for instance. However, as the general point here is that we have long signalled the need for people to have a place within MIQ. That's been part of our public communication for some time because we need to make sure that we can manage the flow of New Zealanders and the high demand we have before Christmas.
You don't think that the system should be people who have booked flights the earliest should be receiving those vouchers?
Of course, we have no way of knowing who has booked a flight and when they have booked it. That is a relationship directly between an individual and an airline, and sometimes even involves a third-party booking system. That is why we flagged in advance the need for people who would be entering New Zealand from that date to have a voucher. We did as much as we could to communicate that out, but it is very hard for us to know precisely who has booked, and in some case, they have been coming in on charter flights, which makes it even more difficult.
People who booked though before the MIQ scheme even existed in its current design, in the first half of 2020. MD didn't start its publicity campaign around the voucher scheme until September 25.
So you're talking about someone who, for instance, might have booked in, say, February for those dates. Yeah. And of course, there we are relying as much as we can on the support of airlines to communicate in those cases. I have seen cases, though, where someone has used Expedia or a third-party booking system, which has complicated things. Ultimately, we have had to put in a system that can give some assurance, of course, to travelling New Zealanders that when they arrive in New Zealand, they have a place in managed isolation. And in the same way that you can't be guaranteed when you go online that you're going to be able to find an available flight, you can't be guaranteed necessarily with short notice that you will be able to find a place in MIQ. What it does for you, though, is when you go onto the website, you can provisionally book a space. It will be held for you until you then get a matching flight. So we recognise the most important thing and sometimes difficult thing will be that isolation spot. We reserve it for you. You've then got a period of time to find a flight that will accompany it. That enables us to plan. Now, we have over 6,000 people coming through in any given period of time. It's per capita higher than the likes of Australia. It's much more rigorous than most countries. It does require New Zealanders offshore to plan ahead. And we will need to acknowledge, just in the same way you won't always get a flight before Christmas, you won't always get a managed isolation spot then either.
Prime Minister, you
I'll take the last couple of questions. Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of things that the government is looking at in terms of supporting small businesses, so further
Yeah.
measures. And you listed 4 different things, including introducing a small business growth fund, repurposing small business cash flow loan scheme,
Yeah.
Microfinance company, or expanding the venture investment fund.
Correct.
Is there a particular one of those options that you're leaning more towards?
Look, not necessarily, although I think the learnings from, one of them is, the ongoing repurposing of the small business loan scheme. We will have learnt a lot by the profile of businesses that have accessed that scheme, just as we're likely to learn a lot about the basis on which they'll access it in the future, because we will be changing the criteria. Keeping in mind, though, that extra work is coming from the Small Business Advisory team. So that council put forward these recommendations. They worked on this pre-COVID. Now I think it's our job to learn the lessons of COVID and say, actually, we're leaning now more towards a loan scheme, or is it something completely different that is going to suit those ongoing needs?
Do you have a timeline for when we might find out a bit
First
more?
tranche is the extension of the interest-free period and the loan period. Second tranche is the criteria, expanding that for the small business loan scheme. Then we move on to, at the same time, we're moving on to those exploratory work around other alternatives. I am very mindful that there are some models for us to look at, such as the UK. They have a range of different options there that I think is worthy us considering. Last question, Ben.
During the CNN coverage of the US election, there's an ad of you that comes up as a promo shot, and you say, "I don't understand America at all." And it's out of context.
It is out of context. Thank you for recognising that. I was talking about gun reform.
I just wonder actually what your thoughts are more generally as you watch the beautiful chaos of all these results coming in.
Look, ultimately every country's democracy is different. Some will look to our MMP system. The fact that we were able to quite legitimately swear in a government today on the same day that we received the final vote count, and they may consider that a curiosity. We each have our own systems. But as I said yesterday, my view is that regardless of where we are in the world, the most important thing is that we have good, strong, stable democracies. And they flourish when people support and believe in their democracy and their institutions. When political parties believe and support their democracies and institutions, and as much as we're possible, we acknowledge differences of opinion, but we try to work beyond that partisanship that ultimately can be quite destabilising. Thanks, everyone.